Hi, I'm Dr. Barbara Mitra, and this is for students on my MEX 1000 module studying media and culture, and I'm going to talk about ideas to do with globalization. I hope you enjoy the video. So the first thing we need to think about is what is globalization, and there are many different ideas about globalization, but one idea is about our interconnectedness, particularly through global media networks, where people around the world can see the same memes, videos, music, films, for example. And some people argue that this is transforming cultures, nations and identities, particularly through our networked global society. And the cultural imperialism thesis is the idea that the world is becoming a single place where the local is less important and large corporations dominate and operate globally and dominate on a world scale, producing products with global appeal in mind. And we can think of Hollywood blockbusters or Disney, McDonald's, Coca-Cola in relation to these ideas, and they reach into huge markets across Asia, Africa, South America, for example. And some people argue this has led to standardization and simplification of products, where local culture is simply swamped by monolithic global mass culture. And then we come to the criticisms of cultural imperialism, because the world is not a single unified place, not politically, not economically, not culturally, and there are global tensions and differences. So rather than homogenization, where everything becomes the same, what is occurring is fragmentation. So alongside increased global flows, there are increasing national and local distinctiveness. For example, news agendas continue to be dominated by domestic stories, taking national angles and interpretations on international events. So globalization was and is an uneven process. The local is not replaced by globalization, but understood in the context of global relationships. So we have the notion of glocalization, the global being linked to the local in a dynamic relationship. The first wave of globalization includes the viewpoint that globalization changes and influences everything else. So a bit like the cultural imperialism thesis. So there's homogenization of culture, a loss of national sovereignty. And this viewpoint sees globalization as a singular process, eroding boundaries of nation states and societies. In the second wave of globalization, there's a clash of cultures, so globalization is seen as more of a discourse, often resulting in a resurgence of nationalism, where people are skeptical of globalization. So the nation state is still important, and there are limits perceived, though, about globalization and skepticism about it. And in the third wave of globalization, it's realized that the effects, the influences of globalization are uneven. Globalization doesn't sweep away everything before it. There's less clear geographical demarcations. The marginalized, for example, might live in the same cities as the elites. So hybridization typifies cultural globalization. And globalization is heterogeneous, or not the same everywhere, and this recognizes the complexities of globalization. So cultural hybridity suggests there's more of a fusion in terms of how people engage with global products. So this word hybridity suggests a mixing and blending rather than global culture taking over. Some use the term creolization to refer to hybridization, as it absorbs and transforms culture. So cultural flows consist of images, ideas, sounds, symbols, people, capital and products, whether these are global, regional or transnational. Even if there are dominant forces, there can be countervailing flows and forms of resistance, which lead to increasing hybridity and polyethnicity. And there are cultural products, texts, and other materials that transcend particular cultures and places. For example, Harry Potter has universal appeal and has been translated into at least 67 languages. And Hannertz uses the term global ecumen, a term that's used by geographers to mean inhabited land. So cultural globalization is probably the one that we're most familiar with, but there's economic globalization and political globalization as well. So really, we should conceive of globalizations rather than globalization. And this just highlights how complex this process is. So we can relate these ideas to something like football, which is one of the world's most popular sport, where local cultures might adapt and redefine global cultural products to suit their particular customs and needs. So no matter how polyethnic a society might be, individual members are expected to identify with a specific national team, where nations display their support through clothing or songs, flags, for example, turning the global game into the glocal game. And globalization is highlighted in how the media use specific terms and points of reference. For example, when Manchester United was captained by Roy Keane, he was described as Ireland's Roy Keane. So clubs and players are symbols of home, and they're associated with local symbols and branding. And this term diaspora is where people identify with a particular place but don't live there. And some people argue that football creates a virtual diaspora for particular clubs. So Manchester United, for example, being supported by people all over the world. And there are some useful references for you. If you're a student here at the University of Worcester, these are available online for you to access, and get in touch if you have difficulty finding or accessing any of these. Thank you for watching. And that's all from me on this topic of globalization. Hope you found it useful. Thank you for watching, and do look at my other topics.